Hi there. You're listening to The Everglade Chronicles, a reading. I'm Garrett Shave, the author. Do I hear the roar of a dragon in the distance? This week I am tackling Chapter 6, The Dragon's Storm. Now let's get started. When I arrived the next morning, the sun was bright. As I walked along the shore, I couldn't help but notice the presence of a small red plastic paddle boat. It was nestled by the reeds and the brush, its sail hoisted into the air. It had to have been Cutty Sark, a rambunctious little pirate boy. Who was Cutty Sark? No one really knew, actually. Sometimes he would sail around the island in his little red boat and wave at people. Other times he would disappear for days on end and return with many tales to tell. I had the pleasure of meeting him once or twice, and he had just turned 9. He has quite the imagination and a few outlandish stories to tell. Nonetheless, he insists every little detail actually happened. He takes his name from the sea clipper of the same name, and frequently tells everyone that his father loves boats and ships. Either way, whenever Cutty is around, you can bet he has a good story to tell you, even if you don't want to listen. As I walked towards the bridge, I caught sight of little Cutty. He sometimes wore a pirate boy outfit, and today was no exception. While many would have just given him an odd look, many others, including myself, always made it part of our routine to say hello to him. He turned and waved at me. His bright face was animated. He had dusty blonde hair, short cut and wavy. His eyes were as blue as the water. "Afternoon, my lord," he bowed abruptly. I noticed that today he also wore an eye patch. His black tricorn hat was in his little boat, next to a stuffed green parrot plush. "Afternoon, Cutty," I remarked. "How are you?" "Good. Just back from another adventure," he commented. He held out his hand and showed me a golden pendant. It looked like a thrift store find, and was likely some sort of plastic costume jewelry piece from the 90s. "Fantastic," I commented. "Where did you get that?" "Walagia," he said randomly. I blinked. "I must be going," I laughed. "Glad you made it back in one piece, Cutty. Where are you headed next?" "I have not decided yet, my lord. I figure I would stay around here for a while. Something tells me things are changing." "They sure are," I said, turning to look at the island. "What is happening?" he asked, crossing his arms. "The Emperor," I remarked coldly. "He is evil, Cutty. Be glad you can freely sail around. I would not remain long if I were you." "Understood, my lord. Good to see you again." He smiled at me as I walked away. What a strange little boy. The meadow was filled with children. It was the first official day of our new season. It was quite warm that day as well, with hardly a breeze to cool us down. I marched right along, past the royal city and around the band of elms. I passed the observatory and waved to Lord Cameron. When I crossed the bridge, I stood to look out at the pristine flowing waters below. It was truly a lovely day. Unfortunately, someone was waiting for me. Victor was preoccupied, his hands on his hips aggressively. Both Lucille and Eva wore looks of despair. "A visitor, my lord," Victor said, turning around and bowing gently. It was Tigress who was waiting for me. Given my rank, she bowed from the neck and adjusted her hands on her hips. She was a pretty girl, I would admit that, but her menacing look gave her no compliment. She was dressed in the same regalia as the other Elite Four. Her plastic armor was painted red, and her blonde hair was tied into a ponytail. She was not wearing her helmet. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I asked mildly. "The Exalted One desires your presence," she said shortly. "He shall see you today, at high noon." "Excellent," I said. "I should like to see our Emperor, and so early in the season, too." Lucille giggled, but Roberta, Tigress, kept a stern look. She steadied her hand over her scabbard, where her samurai blade lay dormant. "No need for violence over a simple joke," I gestured. Victor had noticed where her hand had gone, and was willing and ready to draw his own sword. "Tell the Emperor I shall see him at noon." "This was not an invitation," she snipped. "This was a command." High noon had come, and the sun was prominent in the blue sky. It had become quite hot. Lucille, Victor, and I set off for the capital city. It would certainly look out of place if I did not travel with my guard or my royal attendant. We did not stop to socialize with anyone, instead making our way directly towards the Emperor's perch. It was a steep climb up the hill at a place once called Queen's Summit, and the time before the Emperor it would have been called King's Summit. As you can imagine, the terminology changed whenever a king or queen sat the throne. Considering this was the meadow's first emperor, he changed it to represent something entirely new and powerful. When we had reached the top, armed guards greeted us. They were dressed entirely different from the ones protecting us at the season opening before. These young lads and a few girls were dressed like military men. They wore spiked caps, some even had black capes, and carried plastic pikes. "Lord Theo to see his Imperial Majesty," Lucille informed them. They nodded, and Lord Isaac himself approached us. Once more he was dressed in the garb of his position. A thickly heavy robe hung off his shoulders. Gosh, did he ever look overheated. He gestured for us to follow him. He walked with his staff and barely said a word. He was sweating profusely. Emperor's Perch was a wide-open mesa with a barely used treehouse occupying one edge of the hill. It was situated in a mighty oak. "I can hardly believe the Emperor desires to see you," he huffed. "Such a simple and petty lord, without any standing." I decided to ignore the lord, for he was annoying me. As we walked, I noticed Lady Sakura nestled comfortably against a tree. She was dressed in a formal blue and gold kimono, reading a book about ancient Egypt. Apparently she heard our approach, for she slipped her bookmark in and shut the book with a loud thud. "Good afternoon, my lord." Her voice was soft. As she approached us, I noticed she had peacock feathers protruding from her hair, which was in a neat bun. Quite lovely, yet random. "Your Majesty," I bowed slightly. "She is not a majesty," Lord Isaac gasped sourly. "She does not deserve that courtesy." "She is the Queen of Rivers, is she not?" I asked. Lord Isaac turned away, impatient. "What brings you to the Emperor's Perch?" she asked. I could not help but notice the large amount of guards she carried with her. They were either there to protect her or stop her from leaving. The analogy of a trapped bird in a gilded cage came back to me just then. Sakura was brushing her long black hair with her hands, staring directly at me. Her neat bun had come undone, but the feathers remained. "The Emperor has summoned me, as it were," I replied aimlessly, looking over at Isaac. "That cannot be good, my lord," she said in reply. "I shall go with you." "Preposterous!" Isaac shot back, listening closely. "The Exalted One wishes to see Lord Theo, and Lord Theo alone. You are not welcome." "I shall do as I wish, your grace," the lady shot back angrily. "I am of a higher title than you. Can you not tell? I am Queen of Rivers, and the Emperor's former betrothed. I think I have more rights than you, good sir." "Your queenly title is nothing but self-proclaimed," the chief administrator was arguing. "You have no more privileges than I do. As a lord of the Emperor's council, you are basically lower than myself because I serve on the council and you do not." Lady Sakura did not have a rebuttal. Instead, she snorted and crossed her arms in defiance. "I am still going with you," she growled. "You cannot stop me. I am going by my own free will." "That is not a problem with me, your grace," I said aloud. Lord Isaac seemed to accept it, and we carried on with our little walk. The Emperor was seated on his old wicker throne. The dragon throne was ageless. A thin girl in a long kimono was holding a beach umbrella over his form. It was obviously too hot for the Emperor to be out in the direct sun. The Elite Four were around him, chatting lowly as we approached. On either side of the throne stood two very tall ninth graders, carrying tall halberds. They looked like ghosts. Their red outfits looked like sheets with small slits cut for eyes. How could their outfits be comfortable in this heat? They stood still as statues, eyes staring forward, seemingly unbothered. The Emperor himself looked very much like he did at the seasonal opening. He was garbed in full samurai regalia that reminded me of a Japanese shogun. He wore his famous kabuto helmet and a veil. I could only see his watery blue eyes, which seemed to twinkle maliciously in the shade of the umbrella. I could feel the evil glare upon me. The Elite Four stood back as we fell into a deep bow, sinking to our knees. The red guards shifted. "Exalted One," Isaac was saying, "Lord of Cloverleaf is here to see you, as you demanded." The Dragon Emperor gestured for us to rise, so we did. He did not speak, but signaled with his hand that I come forward. "What is the Lady Sakura doing here?" Tigress asked angrily. "I came on my own accord," she shot back. "Do not speak so horribly to the Queen of Rivers." "No one but you and your silly brother recognize that foreign title," Fox remarked coldly. "You are merely to be addressed as a lady of this realm, not a majesty," Crane hissed. The Emperor raised his right hand for silence. I stood before him and bowed gently to my stomach. Your Radiance, your Imperial Majesty, the Exalted One. I tried to stammer as many formal addresses as I could into one sentence. Addressing a king was easy, but a demigod emperor proved more a challenge. Once more, the Emperor did not speak. He only observed me. I could see his eyes darting around, scanning me. He was looking at my face, my thin frame, and my glasses. My spectacles seemed to garner some major attention. He tented his fingers and observed me some more. The Exalted One finds you curious. It was Tigris who broke the silence. Your relation to the former Queen Isis is indeed a topic for great discussion, Crane added bitterly. He finds your alliance with Gaia most interesting and most treasonous, Fox pondered. Mantis did not speak. I felt he pitied me and did not want to see me punished. If I should be permitted to speak, I gestured quietly. The Elite Four glared at me and then looked at their king for a reply. He nodded. Thank you, Your Majesty. Inhaling deeply, I began. I am not treasonous, nor am I bringing any old ideals with me from the days of Isis. I am simply here to lead my small lordship into greatness and restore its former glory. Prince Oberon is an old friend of the family, and I figured he would be able to tell me all I needed to know about this place. I meant no harm in it at all. Why didn't you come and speak to me? Lord Isaac said suddenly. I am the chief administrator. I could have helped. I wanted an unbiased opinion from someone I actually liked, I admitted bluntly. Isaac gave me a snarl, and I noticed the Emperor shift in his seat. He was like stone, with sharp, watery eyes sharply watching me. Lord Isaac is correct, Tigris said. He could have helped you with whatever you needed to know. You did not have to cross national lines illegally and seek the advice of a foreign head of state. My apologies, I bowed. I did not mean any harm. You have caused great harm to the Exalted One, Crane spoke up. By going to Gaia, you have insulted his empire. You have insulted his honor. You are too harsh, Crane. Finally Mantis spoke. His tone was carefully sympathetic. Not harsh enough, I should think, Fox added unduly. The Emperor raised his hand for silence, and he blinked rapidly at me. Your activities around here have not gone unnoticed, young lord, the dragon spoke. His tone was flat. You consistently seek out the advice and knowledge of my inferiors, and in some cases foreigners to my court. I do not find that amusing one bit. I was cut off. Silence! He hollered. I have not finished speaking to you, you insolent pest. You are so much like your cousin that I have no choice but to have you watched. Your keen sense of knowledge is what will bring you down. Curiosity killed the cat, or have we forgotten? If you wish to remain here alive and carry your title, then you best silence yourself. I nodded gravely and slunk back slightly. You wear the Walker name like a red cape in a sea of black, he added, growling. He was gripping the hands of the wicker throne, and I could hear the crunch of the aged wood. This particular empire has a different agenda than the one enacted by the famous Queen Isis. Stand your guard and stop meddling! Once more I nodded and slunk back even further. What was I to do now? The Emperor himself had silenced me. I stood back with the others of my party. Lucille was too shocked to say anything, and Sakura had withdrawn a fan from her kimono and was waving it lightly in the air, in a panic. The Emperor gave me a dismissive, aggravated wave. We backed away slowly. That was something, she said, observing her former betrothed. The Emperor himself told you to stop meddling, Lucille whispered. What will you do? I suppose all we can do is carry on and continue playing, I said, my heart limp. Lord Isaac was thrilled with what had transpired and escorted us back to the top of the hill with ease. As we walked, we ran into another large party. I was shocked to see him. It was Commandant Alexei, walking with strides and power. He wore a long black cape, his weird mechanical kerchief, and an angry look. Guards dressed in white Templar armor flanked him as we walked on. We stood out of the way, but he stopped before us. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice muffled and deep. His black cloak enveloped him entirely. Lord Isaac seemed to be paralyzed, unable to speak. "I am Lord Theo of Cloverleaf," I interjected. The Commandant nodded briskly, and I could tell he was smiling. Yes, the young lord. There has been much said about you. I could not help but observe his figure. He was the same height as myself, if not a little taller. He had brown gold eyes that were very vibrant, and his nose and mouth were covered by his mask that had apparently saved him from the injuries he sustained. He wore all black, from his pants to the thin gloves and his cape. He had light brown hair that shot out to the sides and looked quite unkempt. "I am Commandant Alexei, head of the military," he remarked. "I shall swing by later and see if your lordship requires any military attention." "Thank you very much," I remarked with a smile. I do not know what all of these kids were talking about. Commandant Alexei was very kind, at least to me. Perhaps he liked me. Perhaps he saw potential in me. "If you'll excuse me, I have an appointment with the Emperor," he said. He waved his cape and his small retinue moved on. "Why was he so nice to you?" Isaac growled. "He is always mean." "He seemed to like you," Sakura observed. "Well, I like Pokemon as much as the next guy," I admitted, amused. Lord Isaac was not smiling. "Off with you, then!" Over the next week or so, I felt myself being watched intently. I saw more of the Elite Four than I would have liked, and the Commandant had not come to visit me or my lordship just yet. Infrequently, a soldier would walk past the opposite side of the bridge, and I knew I was being monitored. All of us over here could see anyone's approach, but the pawn would just walk to the edge of the bridge and then turn around. At odd times, the guard would stare across at us. It was hardly ever the same lad on patrol. The other lords seemed to shun me as well. I barely saw my good friend Cameron, and the Duchess was apparently always busy. It was a warm Friday evening when Alexei came to visit me. I saw Cuddy Sark's boat docked, but he wasn't around. The only remnant he had left in the boat was his tricorn hat. Victor and I were going over security provisions, mainly concerning the overgrowth of some of our bushes. There was a light breeze in the air, and the weather was temperate enough that we were able to wear tees and shorts. I hardly ever wore shorts, though. With the same powerful strides as I had witnessed at the perch, Alexei came sweeping across the bridge in his normal black regalia. He sure did look imposing with all his white Templar retinue. Tonight they wore white hoods to match their white sweaters, and carried their broadswords extended. "Cloverleaf," the muffled voice spoke. Alexei rested his hands on his hilt. "Such a small lordship for such a powerful man." "I wield such little power," I asserted. "You must be mistaken." His eyes glistened. "I am not mistaken, Lord Walker. Allow me to explain." I gave him a curious look, and he dismissed his guards to the other side of the bridge. They formed a semicircle at the other end, protecting the entrance from the Emperor's pawns. I could feel an odd pain of fear rising. He had used my surname instead of my land's moniker. For what seemed like an eternity of silence, he finally spoke. "I am on your side." I was flabbergasted. He laughed into his kerchief, and the others were just as stunned as I was. When I was much younger, I visited this meadow often. My cousin, you see, lived here, but I did not. The ruling majesty at the time was Isis. I was spellbound by her greatness, her real divinity. She was able to relate to the people in a way that the Dragon Emperor only wishes. When my family finally moved here, I was so eager to join her kingdom. But by that time, Luke was the ruling majesty, and he made for a poor king. "So, you were swept up in the royal mess and joined the Dragon Emperor?" Victor asked. The Commandant nodded. It was the right thing to do, I felt. If I could work from the inside, then perhaps I could help undo his reckless power. He was one of the first people to introduce himself when I moved here. We became fast friends. The Emperor himself is a powerful person, and he was powerful back then when he took control. He had come from outside the meadow, but he had played here before and knew the rules. "So, you are interested in a resistance?" I asked. It was intriguing to note that the Emperor had once been a member of the meadow, a subject of another sovereign. Alexei nodded briefly. In a sense, yes. "I had to come and see you, but not immediately. I was ill for that little while, and if I took a keen interest in the Walker boy, then I would surely be under suspicion from the Elite Four. This is official business." "What does the Exalted One have planned, then?" I asked thoughtfully. Alexei strolled around our little compound, gazing about before speaking. "A conquest of Gaia." "What?" Lucille was outraged. "That'll never happen," Victor gasped. I nodded. Of course. The Emperor loves Violet too much, and the only way to have her is the conquest of Gaia and the elimination of Prince Oberon. Alexei nodded. Smart lad you are. But yes, that is one of the main reasons. The other being that the Emperor hates competition. He must be eternally dominant. Plus, it would look better if the entire meadow was a unified kingdom, like in the days of old. He is even thinking about extending the borders beyond the meadow, into the neighborhood, into other parks. Ambitious, Victor mumbled, rubbing his chin. How are we able to prevent such a calamity? Lucille asked. I gasped. Before Alexei could speak, Eva crossed the bridge. She was surprised at the sight of the Commandant, but bowed gently anyway. Alexei looked her over carefully. She is one of us, I spoke quickly. A scholar from Cameron's lands, but she hangs out with me often, and I consider her a close friend. What's going on? Eva pondered aloud. We filled her in, and she gratefully agreed to go along with it. Now, there is no way we can actually prevent this from happening, Alexei said. If there is opposition from within the inner circle, the dragon will be suspicious. He is used to little or no disagreement at all. We must allow this to happen. Can we not warn Gaia? Victor asked. Alexei nodded intently. That is exactly what we must do. We must go along with the war and the battles, but we can aid Gaia in any way possible. My utmost hope is that the Dragon Emperor is reduced to rubble, and that the kingdom is restored to the age of Isis. He turned to me, his eyes gleaming again. You, Lord Theo, are friends with Prince Oberon. You must find a way to warn him. When is the battle starting? Eva asked. This I do not know, Alexei said, brushing his cape. Nothing has been explicitly planned just yet, so we must wait for the time being. I appreciate all of this, you know, I said thoughtfully. Alexei went to leave. We have the same hopes and dreams, I should think. I am simply not strong enough to fight this on my own. When you arrived, I knew change would be imminent, the masked man said. He snapped his fingers, and his men came across from the bridge. All is in order here, my men. We shall be going, he said. He turned back to me and winked as they crossed the bridge. I could hardly believe what had just happened. Here I thought I was battling a bush full of thorns, but there were actually flowers growing. Alexei would prove to be a formidable ally. I now had to warn Gaia and Prince Oberon. You know, I said aloud, of all the children I have spoken with, of all the boys I've chatted with, it seems that there is this smoke-screen of dominance and a mask of support for the Emperor. No one really seems to like him but obey him out of obligation. His real power is transparent, and I bet if we all banded together we could defeat him. Isn't that how all fearful rulers are? Eva asked, crossing her arms. They rule through fear, and once the fear is gone, they are uncovered as helpless puppies. Yes, Lucille added. He would be reduced to rubble if it weren't for his facade of greatness and his sworn protectors. Then we must do our best to ensure the Dragon Emperor is removed from power. Isn't there an old dragon weakness? Underbelly, Victor remarked quickly and logically. It's the underbelly. Dragons are vulnerable to attacks from there. Our best efforts shall go towards cutting up the underbelly of the dragon then, I smirked. I was in the school library when I ran into Zach Beverly. My class was studying the Russian Revolution, and we were at the climax. I felt some similarities between the Bolsheviks and the Romanovs in relation to our own game. Zach looked nothing like he did when he was Commandant Alexei. The power and conduct were gone when he was simply Zach. It was almost as if a nocturnal cycle made the Commandant dormant, and he would awaken later, flying high like the phoenix. There were two sides of the same coin. The only thing Zach could not shake was his powerful stride. I could hardly tell that they were the same person. In fact, Zach had been staring at me from afar for quite some time before I even noticed he was there. He was quite good at blending in with his surroundings, considering he had such an average appearance. It was his seemingly gleaming eyes that caught me when I looked up from my Russia book. "Oh," I said, startled. "I had no idea you were there." He only smiled and came to sit next to me at the rounded table, slithering over like a snake. I was alone. I preferred to do my studying alone. The desk was covered in random books and strewn notes. "I figured I would find such a learned boy as yourself at the library," he remarked. His voice was lighter than the mask made it seem. His mouth was rather small, as was his button nose. "I finished my Russian Revolution project last night. I'm doing some extra reading, that's all." "History fascinates me," I retorted. "Why have you come?" It was taboo for us to discuss the kingdom game outside the meadow, but I could tell Zack wanted to. I got a sense from his glinting brown and golden eyes. They were quite powerful. He propped his arm up on the table and looked over at me, eyes dreamy. I could feel my face giving him a strange look. "The Dragon Emperor has made his move," he said simply, his grin never faltering. "How do you know this?" "He told me himself just 20 minutes ago." "You know who he is?" I asked, startled. "Yes, of course," Zack smiled. "I am but a select few who are privy to his identity. Do you not recall? I am, after all, the Commandant. I was once a member of his Elite Four as well, before I took on the duties of leading the military." I nodded in reply, absorbing that information. I had to ask a bold question. "Who is he?" "I will reveal that a little later." The Commandant's smile grew. It was almost a malicious sneer. His power had seemingly returned. While he was in this mortal boy body, the half-bionic Alexei I knew shone through. "The Emperor is planning a series of raids against Gaia. Have you spoken to your little forest friends yet? Time is of the essence here. I might be able to delay him a little, but it will happen this weekend regardless. I will go to Mark this afternoon, once I am finished here. He will likely be at the meadow," I replied, closing my books. I figured we had more time, but it seemed our Exalted One was eager for a war anyway. "What is the purpose of these raids?" "Flesh them out. Make them mad," he said sternly. His Cheshire grin had disappeared as quickly as it had shown itself. "Once the forest people are angry and ready for war, they will attack first. This will give the Emperor probable cause for a war, and the children will be more inclined to support it since we were attacked first. I would assume these raids will probably be harmless." "Yes," he nodded, rising slowly. He adjusted his tea. "Probably just some border hazing, maybe some pushing and annexation of small territory." I nodded and Zack went to leave. "Wait," I said suddenly. Zack froze, turning to me. A small smile covered his lips again and he blinked at me. "Please, before you go, are you able to tell me something? Our Exalted One, was he really a resident of the meadow when my cousin ruled?" "Yes," he replied. "An affluent one at that. He held a high position." I asked no more and I knew Zack would not reveal another secret. The secrets of the Emperor were heavily guarded. He waved goodbye and exited the library, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my notes. The Dragon Emperor could have very well been a close confidant of my cousin. Dare I say it, he could have even been a friend. He could have been watching, waiting for the right moment, absorbing information left and right, remembering things. The idea of such betrayal made me shiver. Luke Price had been the legitimate heir of Queen Isis, and he was evidently overthrown by an outside force. The Dragon Emperor could have been a friend who betrayed Luke and Isis. Too many questions and too little answers. I had to think about the relationship my cousin could have had with the Dragon Emperor. I packed my things and made for the meadow. That concludes Chapter 6, The Dragon Storm. Join me next week when I read Chapter 7, A History Lesson. Commandant Alexei has entered the scene and is proving to be an ally. Will that stand firm, or will Theo's hopes fall and dissolve? Will the meadow truly be free of the Dragon Emperor, or will they all be crying dragon tears? Find out next week. Thanks and enjoy. Dragon Boats by Fass is the music used during this novel on the podcast. Find us online on Facebook and Instagram by searching @Everglade Chronicles. You can find all 3 of the Everglade Chronicles novels exclusively on Amazon. Thank you kindly for your support.